What I'm going to tell you today is more than just a story. It's an experience. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss this powerful story. And comment the city you're watching from. We love knowing where our audience comes from. When the ending arrives, you'll understand why so many people stay until the very end. Let's go. The October rain fell in sheets across Interstate 90, just outside Seattle, Washington, turning the asphalt into a mirror that reflected the gray sky above. Traffic Officer Charlotte Brennan sat in her patrol car, parked in the emergency lane near Exit 14, watching the vehicles blur past in waves of spray and muted colors. She had been stationed here for 3 hours, and the monotony of the afternoon had settled into her bones, like the dampness that seeped through the seams of her uniform. Charlotte was 34 years old, though the lines around her eyes suggested someone who had lived through more than her years should have held. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a tight bun, regulation perfect, and her hazel eyes carried a weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. She had been a widow for 2 years now, ever since the night a drunk driver had crossed the center line on Highway 2 and taken her husband, Marcus, from her in an instant that shattered her world into irreparable pieces. But that was a story for another time. A story she tried not to think about during the long hours of her shift, when the silence in the patrol car became too loud and the memories too vivid. What lay ahead in this afternoon would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. The universe had a way of setting things in motion when you least expected it, and Charlotte was about to discover that fate sometimes wore the disguise of a speeding luxury vehicle on a rain-soaked highway. At 3:47 p.m., her radar gun registered a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class traveling at 89 miles per hour in a 60 zone. Charlotte's hand moved automatically to her radio, her voice crisp and professional as she called in the plate number. Washington license plate, BXK 7429. The response came back clean. No warrants, no stolen vehicle reports. Just another speeder in a city full of them. Another citation to write before her shift ended at 6. She activated her lights and pulled out into traffic, the siren cutting through the rain like a blade. The Mercedes didn't slow immediately, and for a moment Charlotte wondered if the driver even noticed her presence. But then the brake lights flared red, and the luxury sedan eased onto the shoulder, coming to a stop about 200 yards ahead. Charlotte grabbed her citation book and stepped out into the rain, pulling her jacket tight against the wind that whipped across the highway. The water soaked through her boots within seconds, and she could feel the cold seeping into her socks as she approached the driver's side window. Professional courtesy dictated a certain distance, a certain posture. Hand near the radio, eyes scanning the interior for anything unusual, mind cataloging every detail. The window rolled down, and Charlotte found herself looking at a man in his late 30s with disheveled brown hair and eyes that were rimmed red with exhaustion or emotion. She couldn't tell which. His name, she would learn, was Maximilian Thornwood, though everyone called him Max. He wore an expensive suit that was wrinkled and stained with what looked like coffee, and his hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. "License and registration, please," Charlotte said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Max fumbled with his wallet, his hands shaking so badly that he dropped it twice before managing to extract his driver's license. He handed it to her through the window, and Charlotte noticed the tremor in his fingers, the way his breath came in short, ragged gasps. "Sir, are you aware you were traveling at 89 miles per hour in a 60 zone?" she asked, glancing down at the license. "Maximilian James Thornwood, age 38, address in the Bellevue area, one of the wealthier suburbs of Seattle." That's when he broke. Max's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his cheeks, mixing with the rain that had started to blow in through the open window. His shoulders shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, a place of profound despair that Charlotte recognized all too well. She had cried like that herself, in the months after Marcus died, when the grief became too much to carry alone. "Please," Max gasped, his voice breaking on the word. "Please, I know I was speeding. I know I broke the law, but I can't lose my license. My daughter—" He stopped, unable to continue, his hands covering his face as he wept. Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the professional armor she had built so carefully over the past 2 years. This wasn't the usual excuse, the typical plea for leniency that she heard a dozen times a week. This was genuine, raw anguish, and it called to something in her that she thought had died along with Marcus. "Sir," she said, her voice softer now, "I need you to take a deep breath and explain what's going on." Max lowered his hands, and Charlotte could see the desperation in his eyes, the kind that came from being pushed to the absolute edge of endurance. "My daughter," he said again, his voice hoarse. "Her name is Emma. She's 7 years old and she has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We're on our way to Seattle Children's Hospital right now for her chemotherapy session, and if I lose my license, I can't take her to her treatments. There's no one else. Her mother died 3 years ago, and it's just us. And if I can't drive..." He broke off again, and Charlotte heard a small voice from the back seat, weak and thin. "Daddy, are we going to be late?" Charlotte stepped back from the window, her heart hammering in her chest. She moved to the rear passenger side and looked in, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A little girl sat strapped into a booster seat, her head covered with a colorful knit cap that couldn't quite hide the fact that she had no hair underneath. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with dark circles under her blue eyes that made her look like a ghost of childhood rather than childhood itself. She wore a pink jacket with butterflies embroidered on the sleeves, and she clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "Hi there," Charlotte said, forcing a smile. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're going to the hospital. I have to get my medicine so I can get better." Charlotte felt tears prickling at the corners of her own eyes, and she blinked them away fiercely. She had worked in law enforcement for 12 years, had seen things that would give most people nightmares, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of this fragile child facing something no child should ever have to face. She walked back to the driver's window, where Max had managed to compose himself slightly, though his eyes were still wet with tears. "Mr. Thornwood," she said, "what time is Emma's appointment?" 4:30, he replied, glancing at the clock on the dashboard. It read 3:52. "We're going to be late. The traffic, the rain. I just wasn't thinking. I was trying to make up time, and I know that's no excuse, but..." Charlotte made a decision then, one that went against every rule in her training manual, every protocol she had been taught to follow. But sometimes, she thought, the right thing to do wasn't the thing written in the rulebook. Sometimes the right thing to do was the human thing. "Mr. Thornwood," she said, "I'm going to escort you to the hospital. Follow my patrol car and stay close. I'll have you there in 15 minutes. Max stared at her, his expression shifting from despair to confusion to something that looked like hope. You're not giving me a ticket?" "I'm getting your daughter to her chemotherapy session," Charlotte said firmly. "That's all that matters right now. Roll up your window and follow me." She didn't wait for a response. She walked back to her patrol car, her mind racing with the implications of what she was doing. She could lose her job for this, abandoning her post, failing to issue a citation for a clear violation, using her patrol vehicle for unauthorized purposes. But as she activated her lights and siren and pulled out onto the highway, with the black Mercedes following close behind, Charlotte felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. A sense of purpose that went beyond the daily grind of writing tickets and directing traffic. The drive to Seattle Children's Hospital took exactly 14 minutes. Charlotte cut through traffic with practiced ease, her siren clearing a path through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle. She could see the Mercedes in her rearview mirror, Max's white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel visible even from a distance, and she felt a strange kinship with this man she had just met. Two people united by loss, by grief, by the desperate need to hold on to what remained. Don't miss a thing. Subscribe now and discover the ending of this and other thrilling and dramatic stories. The hospital appeared ahead, a massive complex of buildings that rose against the gray sky like a fortress of hope and heartbreak. Charlotte pulled into the emergency lane at the main entrance and watched as Max parked the Mercedes in the drop-off zone. He jumped out and ran to the back door, unbuckling Emma from her booster seat with trembling hands. The little girl wrapped her thin arms around his neck, and Max lifted her with a gentleness that spoke of countless similar moments, countless trips to this same hospital. Charlotte got out of her patrol car and approached them, and Max turned to face her with Emma still in his arms. "Officer," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. You have no idea what this means." "You don't have to thank me," Charlotte interrupted gently. "Just get Emma to her appointment. That's all that matters." But as Max turned to carry his daughter into the hospital, Emma looked back over his shoulder at Charlotte, her blue eyes meeting the officer's hazel ones. "Are you an angel?" the little girl asked, her voice so soft that Charlotte almost didn't hear it over the sound of the rain. Charlotte felt her throat tighten, and she managed a small smile. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who wants to help." "Like a guardian angel," Emma insisted. And then she gave Charlotte a smile that lit up her pale face, a smile that carried all the innocence and trust that childhood should hold, before Max carried her through the automatic doors and into the hospital. Charlotte stood in the rain for a long moment, watching the doors swing shut behind them. She should go back to her post, should resume her shift as if nothing had happened. But she couldn't shake the image of Emma's face, the sound of Max's sobs, the way the little girl had called her an angel. She walked back to her patrol car and sat behind the wheel, but instead of driving away, she found herself pulling into the hospital parking lot. She told herself she would just wait to make sure they got checked in okay, that there were no complications, that Emma made it to her treatment on time. It was a lie, of course. She knew even as she thought it that she was lying to herself. The truth was that she couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without knowing that this story would have at least a temporary happy ending. Charlotte parked in a visitor space and made her way into the hospital lobby, following the signs to the pediatric oncology ward on the 4th floor. The elevator ride seemed to take forever, and when the doors finally opened, she found herself in a hallway painted with cheerful murals of animals and rainbows that stood in stark contrast to the reality of what happened here. She didn't have to search long. Through the window of a treatment room, she could see Max sitting in a chair beside a hospital bed, holding Emma's hand while a nurse in cheerful scrubs prepared an IV line. The little girl looked so small in the big hospital bed, so fragile and vulnerable, and Charlotte felt that crack in her chest widen just a little more. A voice beside her said, "Can I help you, officer?" Charlotte turned to find a woman in a white coat regarding her with kind but curious eyes. Her name tag read, Dr. Miriam Castellanos, Pediatric Oncology. Charlotte started, then stopped, unsure how to explain what she was doing here. "I escorted them here. The father was speeding because they were running late, and I just wanted to make sure." Dr. Castellanos' expression softened with understanding. "That's very kind of you. Emma Thornwood is one of our regular patients. She's been fighting all for 8 months now. She's a brave little girl, and her father is devoted to her. He hasn't missed a single treatment session." "What's her prognosis?" Charlotte asked, the question coming out before she could stop it. The doctor's expression became guarded, the way medical professionals looked when they were about to deliver news that balanced hope and reality in equal measure. "It's complicated. The first round of chemotherapy didn't work as well as we hoped, so we've had to adjust her treatment protocol. The next 8 months will be critical. If the cancer responds to this new approach, she has a good chance of achieving remission. If not..." She paused, and Charlotte understood what she wasn't saying. "But we're optimistic. Emma is strong, and she has her father fighting for her every step of the way." Charlotte nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched through the window as the nurse inserted the IV into Emma's arm, as the little girl winced but didn't cry, as Max stroked her hand and whispered something that made her smile despite the pain. "He lost his wife to breast cancer 3 years ago," Dr. Castellanos continued, her voice soft. "He's been raising Emma alone ever since. When she was diagnosed, it nearly broke him. But he's held himself together for her sake. That man would move mountains if it meant saving his daughter." Charlotte thought of her own loss, of the empty house she returned to every night, of the nursery they had been planning to decorate before Marcus died. She had always wanted children, had dreamed of being a mother, but that dream had died along with her husband on that dark stretch of Highway 2. And now, Standing in this hospital hallway watching a father fight for his daughter's life, Charlotte felt that old longing stir inside her, mixed with something new. A desire not just to have a child of her own, but to help this child, this brave little girl who had called her an angel. "Officer?" Dr. Castellanos said, and Charlotte realized she had been staring through the window for too long. "Sorry," Charlotte said, shaking herself from her thoughts. "I should go. I'm still on duty." "It was kind of you to bring them here," the doctor said. "We see a lot of desperate parents in this ward, people pushed to their limits trying to save their children. It's nice to know there are officers like you out there, willing to show compassion." Charlotte managed a small smile and turned toward the elevator. But as she walked away, she found herself glancing back at the treatment room one more time. Max had looked up and caught her eye through the window, and he mouthed 2 words that Charlotte could read clearly. "Thank you." She nodded in acknowledgement and stepped into the elevator. But as the doors closed and she descended back to the lobby, Charlotte knew that this wasn't over. Something had been set in motion on that rain-soaked highway, something that went beyond a simple act of kindness. She didn't know what it was yet, didn't understand the full implications of what she had done, but she could feel it in her bones, in the space where her grief lived, a sense that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The drive back to her patrol post took 20 minutes, and Charlotte spent the entire time thinking about Emma's pale face, about the way Max had broken down in tears, about the doctor's words. The next 8 months will be critical. 8 months. 240 days. 32 weeks. However she calculated it, it felt like both an eternity and no time at all. When she finally pulled back into her spot on the emergency lane of Interstate 90, the rain had lessened to a drizzle, and the afternoon light was beginning to fade into evening. Charlotte picked up her citation book and stared at the blank form she had pulled out before stopping the Mercedes, the one she had been about to fill out with Max's information. She thought about the rules she had broken, the protocols she had violated, the potential consequences she might face if anyone found out what she had done. Then she tore the blank citation from the book, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it into the passenger seat footwell. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of routine traffic stops and accident reports, but Charlotte's mind was elsewhere. When she finally clocked out at 6 p.m. and drove home to her small house in the Ballard neighborhood, she found herself sitting in her driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows and the empty rooms that awaited her inside. The house felt even more hollow than usual that night. Charlotte went through the motions of her evening routine, changing out of her uniform, heating up a frozen dinner, trying to watch television. But nothing could distract her from the thoughts that circled in her mind like sharks in dark water. She kept seeing Emma's face, kept hearing Max's desperate plea, kept feeling the way her heart had cracked open just a little when the little girl had called her an angel. At 9 p.m., Charlotte found herself sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, searching for information about acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children. She read about survival rates and treatment protocols, about the side effects of chemotherapy, and the long road to remission. She learned that all was one of the most common childhood cancers, but also one of the most treatable, with survival rates above 90% if caught early. But she also read about the cases that didn't respond to treatment, about the families who had to watch their children fight battles they couldn't win. She closed the laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that threatened to spill over. This wasn't her responsibility, she told herself. She had done her good deed for the day, had gotten Emma to the hospital on time, had shown compassion where the law would have demanded punishment. That should be enough. That should be where this story ended. But Charlotte knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones like the rain had settled into Seattle's streets, that it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She made a decision then. Sitting alone in her kitchen with the ghost of her husband watching from every corner of the empty house. Tomorrow, she would go back to the hospital. She would find Max and Emma, and she would offer to help. Not as a police officer, not as someone fulfilling a professional obligation, but as a human being who understood loss and loneliness and the desperate need to hold on to hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. Charlotte didn't sleep well that night. She lay in the bed she had once shared with Marcus, staring at the ceiling and listening to the rain that had started up again, drumming against the windows like restless fingers. She thought about the nursery they had never finished, about the child they had never had, about all the dreams that had died 2 years ago on Highway 2. But she also thought about Emma's smile, about the way the little girl had looked at her with such trust and innocence, and Charlotte felt something stirring in the empty spaces of her heart. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the possibility of hope, the potential for something new to grow in the wasteland her grief had created. When her alarm went off at 6 a.m., Charlotte was already awake. She showered and dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, a sweater, her leather jacket, and drove to Seattle Children's Hospital before her shift was supposed to start. The early morning light was gray and weak, filtered through clouds that promised more rain, and the hospital parking lot was already filling with cars as Charlotte pulled into a space near the main entrance. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. What would she say? What right did she have to insert herself into this family's life, into their struggle? Max had thanked her yesterday, but that didn't mean he wanted her continued involvement. And yet, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant to be here, that fate or destiny or whatever force governed the universe had put her on that highway at that exact moment for a reason. Finally, she got out of the car and walked into the hospital, following the same route she had taken the day before. The pediatric oncology ward looked different in the morning light. Less ominous, perhaps, but no less serious. Charlotte approached the nurse's station and found a young woman in scrubs with a kind face looking up at her expectantly. "Can I help you?" the nurse asked. "I'm looking for Emma Thornwood," Charlotte said, her voice steady, despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "I brought her and her father here yesterday, and I wanted to check on them." The nurse's expression brightened with recognition. "Oh, you're the police officer. Max told us what you did. That was really wonderful of you." She glanced at her computer screen. "Emma's in room 412. They just got here about 15 minutes ago for her morning labs." Charlotte thanked her and made her way down the hallway, her heart pounding harder with each step. When she reached room 412, she paused outside the door, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She could hear voices inside, Max's low murmur and Emma's higher-pitched responses, interspersed with a woman's professional tone that must belong to a nurse or technician. Charlotte knocked softly on the door frame, and the conversation inside stopped. A moment later, Max appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening with surprise when he saw her. "Officer Brennan," he said, and Charlotte noticed that he had remembered her name from her badge. "I didn't expect... this is a surprise." "I'm off duty," Charlotte said quickly, gesturing to her civilian clothes. "I just wanted to check on Emma, to make sure everything went okay yesterday." Max's expression softened, and Charlotte saw a flash of something in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or relief, or simply the recognition of another human being reaching out in kindness. "Please, come in," he said, stepping back to allow her entry. The room was small but cheerful, decorated with the same bright colors and cartoon characters that covered the walls throughout the pediatric ward. Emma sat on the hospital bed in pink pajamas decorated with unicorns, her knit cap replaced by a different one that featured a smiling sun. A phlebotomist was in the process of drawing blood from her arm, and Emma watched the process with the kind of detached curiosity that suggested this was far from her first time. "Look, Daddy," Emma said when she spotted Charlotte. The angel lady came back. Charlotte felt her throat tighten at the nickname, but she managed a smile as she approached the bed. "Hi, Emma. How are you feeling today?" "Okay," Emma said, though her pale face and the dark circles under her eyes suggested otherwise. "They're taking my blood to make sure the medicine is working. Then we get to go home until tomorrow." "Every day?" Charlotte asked, looking at Max for confirmation. Max nodded, his expression weary. "For the intensive phase of her treatment, yes. 6 days a week for the next 2 months. Chemotherapy infusions on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Labs and checkups the other days. Sundays are our only break." The phlebotomist finished drawing blood and placed a colorful bandage featuring cartoon characters over the puncture site. "All done, sweetie," she said to Emma. "You were so brave. I'll get these to the lab right away." She gathered her supplies and left the room, giving Charlotte a friendly nod as she passed. Already subscribed? Leave a like and tell us where you're watching from. We want to know where our audience comes from. Charlotte pulled up a chair beside the bed, and Emma immediately brightened, sitting up straighter despite her obvious exhaustion. "Did you come to visit me?" the little girl asked, her voice carrying a note of wonder, as if the idea that someone would come to see her specifically was a rare and precious gift. "I did," Charlotte confirmed. "I wanted to make sure you got your medicine yesterday and that everything was okay. The medicine makes me feel yucky," Emma confided, her small voice matter of fact. "But Daddy says it's making the bad cells go away, so I have to be brave." "You are brave," Charlotte said softly. "The bravest girl I've ever met." Max stood near the window, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the interaction with an expression Charlotte couldn't quite read. She glanced at him and saw the shadows under his eyes, the stubble on his jaw that suggested he hadn't shaved in a day or two, the wrinkled clothes that looked like they had been slept in. This was a man running on empty, held together by sheer willpower and love for his daughter. "Mr. Thornwood?" Charlotte said, standing up and gesturing toward the hallway. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Max's expression became guarded, but he nodded. "Emma, sweetheart, I'll be right outside the door, okay? If you need me, just call." "Okay, Daddy," Emma said, already reaching for a coloring book on the bedside table. Charlotte and Max stepped into the hallway, and Charlotte could feel her heart racing as she prepared to say what she had come here to say. This was crazy, she knew. She barely knew these people. She had no right to offer what she was about to offer. But she also knew that if she walked away now, if she didn't at least try, she would regret it for the rest of her life. "Mr. Thornwood," she began. "Max," he interrupted gently. "Please just call me Max." "Max," Charlotte continued, "I know this is going to sound strange, and you have every right to say no, but I want to help. I want to drive Emma to her treatments." Max stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "I'm sorry, what?" "You said yesterday that you can't lose your license because you need to drive Emma to the hospital," Charlotte said, the words coming out in a rush. "But you're exhausted. Anyone can see that. You're trying to work and take care of Emma and keep everything together, and it's too much for one person. Let me help. I can drive you both to her appointments. I work rotating shifts, but I can arrange my schedule to make this work." "I can't ask you to do that," Max said, shaking his head. "You don't even know us. It's too much." "You're not asking. I'm offering," Charlotte said firmly. "And I know we just met, but—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. We were planning to start a family, and then he was gone, and that dream died with him. I've been existing, not living, just going through the motions every day. But yesterday, when I saw Emma, when I heard the desperation in your voice, something changed. I felt something again. I felt like maybe I could do something that mattered, something that would make a difference in someone's life." Max's eyes had become suspiciously bright, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "You don't know what you're offering. This isn't a one-time thing. This is months of treatments, of hospital visits, of watching a child suffer through something that no child should ever have to endure. It's hard. It's heartbreaking. And there's no guarantee." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "I know," Charlotte said softly, "but I want to help anyway. Please, let me do this." Max was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, and Charlotte could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. Finally, he looked at her, and Charlotte saw tears streaking down his cheeks unchecked. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Charlotte thought about her answer, about all the complex emotions churning inside her, about the emptiness she had been carrying for 2 years, and the sudden, unexpected desire to fill it with something meaningful. "Because sometimes," she said finally, "the only way to heal your own broken heart is to help mend someone else's." Max let out a shaky breath and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I don't know what to say. I mean, yes, of course, yes. If you're really serious about this, then yes. And thank you doesn't even begin to cover it. But are you sure? Really sure? I'm sure, Charlotte said. And she was. For the first time in 2 years, she was absolutely certain about something. They exchanged phone numbers, and Charlotte learned that Emma's next chemotherapy session was scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Max provided her with his address in Bellevue, and they made arrangements for Charlotte to pick them up at 1 o'clock. As they talked, Charlotte felt a strange sense of rightness settling over her, as if the universe had finally clicked into alignment after 2 years of being off-kilter. When Charlotte left the hospital that morning, she felt lighter than she had in months. She drove to work. She was scheduled for the afternoon shift, and went through her duties with a renewed sense of purpose. She wrote tickets and directed traffic and responded to accidents, but all the while, she was thinking about Friday, about Emma's smile, about the way Max had looked at her with such profound gratitude. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Charlotte found herself researching childhood cancer, learning about the side effects of chemotherapy, reading survivor stories and support group forums. She bought a new car seat appropriate for a 7-year-old and installed it in her personal vehicle, a reliable Honda Accord that was much less intimidating than her patrol car. She stocked up on supplies that the forums suggested might be helpful: ginger candies for nausea, soft blankets for comfort, coloring books and crayons for distraction. On Friday morning, Charlotte woke up with butterflies in her stomach, feeling nervous in a way she hadn't felt since her first day on the force. She dressed carefully in comfortable but presentable clothes, checked and rechecked the car seat installation, and arrived at Max's address in Bellevue 15 minutes early. The house was a modest 2-story colonial in a quiet neighborhood, with a small yard and a driveway that held only one car, the black Mercedes she remembered from their first encounter. Charlotte parked on the street and walked up to the front door, her heart pounding as she rang the doorbell. Max answered almost immediately, as if he had been waiting by the door. He looked better than he had at the hospital. Clean-shaven, wearing fresh clothes, his hair combed, but the exhaustion in his eyes remained. "Charlotte," he said, and she noticed that he used her first name this time, not her title. "Come in. Emma's almost ready." The interior of the house was neat, but lived in, with toys scattered in the corners and photographs covering every available surface. Charlotte's eyes were drawn to a large portrait hanging over the fireplace. Max and Emma with a beautiful woman who had Emma's blue eyes and blonde hair. Max's late wife, Charlotte realized, and she felt a pang of recognition, of shared loss. "That's Julia," Max said, following her gaze. "Emma's mother. She died 6 months before Emma was diagnosed. Sometimes I think—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Sometimes I think Julia is watching over us from wherever she is, helping Emma fight this. It's probably foolish, but it comforts me." "It's not foolish," Charlotte said. "I talk to my husband sometimes when I'm alone. I tell him about my day, ask him for advice. I know he can't answer, but it helps." Max gave her a look of understanding, and Charlotte saw in his eyes a mirror of her own grief, her own loneliness. They were both survivors of loss, both trying to navigate a world that had shifted beneath their feet, both holding on to hope by their fingertips. "Daddy, I'm ready!" Emma's voice called from upstairs, breaking the moment. Max smiled and called back, "Come on down, sweetheart. Charlotte's here." Emma appeared at the top of the stairs wearing pink leggings and a purple hoodie. Her knit cap, this one featuring a smiling ladybug, pulled down over her head. She carried her stuffed rabbit under one arm and a small backpack decorated with cartoon princesses over her shoulder. When she saw Charlotte, her pale face lit up with a smile that made Charlotte's heart ache. "You came!" Emma exclaimed, descending the stairs with careful steps. "Daddy said you were going to drive us today. Is that true?" "It's true," Charlotte confirmed, kneeling down to Emma's level. "I'm going to take you and your daddy to the hospital for your medicine. And if you want, I can take you to other appointments too. Would that be okay with you?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, then threw her thin arms around Charlotte's neck in an unexpected hug. Charlotte froze for a moment, startled by the sudden display of affection, then slowly wrapped her arms around the little girl, feeling the fragile bones beneath the clothes. the rapid heartbeat against her chest. When Emma pulled back, there were tears in Charlotte's eyes that she quickly blinked away. The drive to Seattle Children's Hospital took 40 minutes, and Charlotte found herself relaxing into a comfortable rhythm with her passengers. Max sat in the front seat, occasionally making small talk about traffic and weather, while Emma chattered away in the back, telling Charlotte about her favorite toys and the cartoon shows she liked to watch. It was ordinary conversation, the kind of mundane details that filled everyday life. But to Charlotte, it felt precious, like she was being given a glimpse into a world she had thought was forever closed to her. At the hospital, Charlotte waited in the treatment room with Max while Emma received her chemotherapy infusion. The process took 3 hours, and Charlotte watched as the little girl slowly grew quieter, her initial enthusiasm fading as the drugs entered her system. Max held Emma's hand the entire time, whispering encouragement and telling stories to distract her from the discomfort. Charlotte felt useless, just sitting there watching, but when she tried to leave to give them privacy, Emma asked her to stay. So Charlotte stayed, and she talked with Max about small things: his job as a software engineer, her work as a traffic officer, the Seattle weather that never seemed to improve. They carefully avoided the big topics, the heavy subjects that lurked at the edges of every conversation: Julia's death, Marcus's death, Emma's uncertain future. By the time the infusion was complete and they were cleared to leave, Emma was pale and listless, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. Max carried her to Charlotte's car, and the little girl fell asleep before they even left the parking lot, her head lolling against the car seat, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest. The drive back to Bellevue was quiet. The only sound, the gentle hum of the engine and Emma's soft breathing from the back seat. Max stared out the window, his expression distant, and Charlotte didn't try to make conversation. Sometimes, she had learned during her own grief, silence was what you needed most. Just the presence of another person who understood that words couldn't fix everything. When they arrived at the house, Max gently lifted Emma from the car seat. The little girl stirred but didn't wake, making small sounds of protest before settling back into sleep against her father's shoulder. Charlotte followed them to the door, not sure if she should say anything or just leave them to their evening routine. "Thank you," Max said at the door, his voice soft so as not to wake Emma. "For today, for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know how else to express." "You don't have to," Charlotte interrupted gently. "I meant what I said. I want to help." "What day is her next appointment?" "Sunday is her day off," Max said. "Then Monday at 10 a.m. for labs, and Wednesday at 2 p.m. for the next chemo session." "I'll be here," Charlotte promised, "for all of them." Max looked at her with an expression that made Charlotte's breath catch, something between hope and disbelief, as if he couldn't quite believe that someone would voluntarily sign up for this journey with them. "I don't understand why you're doing this," he said, "but I'm grateful. More grateful than you'll ever know." Charlotte drove home that evening, feeling exhausted, but fulfilled in a way she hadn't felt in years. She had helped. She had made a difference. She had spent 3 hours in a hospital room watching a little girl receive poison into her veins in the hope that it would save her life. And somehow, impossibly, Charlotte felt more alive than she had since the night Marcus died. Over the following weeks, a routine established itself. Charlotte rearranged her work schedule to accommodate Emma's treatment calendar, working split shifts and trading hours with other officers who were only too happy to have someone willing to take the less desirable time slots. She picked up Max and Emma for every appointment. Labs on Mondays, chemotherapy on Wednesdays and Fridays, follow-up visits with Dr. Castellanos whenever they were scheduled. She learned Emma's favorite songs and played them during the drives. She discovered that the little girl loved stories about princesses and dragons, so Charlotte made up elaborate tales to distract her during the long infusion sessions. She figured out that ginger ale helped with the nausea better than ginger candies, and that soft pretzels were easier for Emma to eat when her appetite disappeared after treatment. Just one click. Subscribe, leave a like, and say where you're watching from. Your support is essential for our growth. Charlotte also learned about Max. Really learned about him. In the way you can only learn about someone when you're sitting beside them during the worst moments of their life. She learned that he was gentle and patient, that he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged during the good days, that he felt guilty for every moment of happiness he experienced while his daughter was sick. She learned that he blamed himself for not noticing Emma's symptoms earlier, even though Dr. Castellanos assured him repeatedly that the cancer had developed rapidly and that earlier detection wouldn't have changed the treatment protocol. She learned that he still loved his late wife deeply, that he kept Julia's clothes in the closet because he couldn't bear to give them away, that he sometimes woke up in the middle of the night forgetting she was gone and reaching for her in the empty bed. Charlotte understood all of this because she did the same things, kept Marcus's belongings, wore his old shirts to bed, still set 2 plates at dinner before remembering she was eating alone. They were 2 broken people, Charlotte and Max, held together by their shared purpose of keeping Emma alive and fighting. As November faded into December, Emma's condition became the central axis around which Charlotte's entire life revolved. She found herself thinking about the little girl constantly, during her shifts, during her off hours, in the quiet moments before sleep. She worried about every fever, every bout of nausea, every day when Emma seemed more tired than usual. She celebrated every small victory, the days when Emma's appetite returned, when her blood counts improved, when she laughed at one of Charlotte's silly stories. Charlotte's colleagues at work noticed the change in her. She smiled more, seemed more engaged, carried herself with a sense of purpose that had been missing for the past 2 years. When they asked what was different, Charlotte gave vague answers about volunteering at the children's hospital, not wanting to explain the full truth of what she was doing or why. In mid-December, on a Wednesday afternoon after Emma's chemotherapy session, Charlotte helped Max carry the sleeping little girl into the house and lingered in the doorway, reluctant to leave, even though her presence was no longer necessary. "Stay for dinner," Max said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush, as if he had been building up the courage to say them. "I mean, if you want to. If you don't have other plans. I'm just going to make pasta, nothing fancy. But you've been here for hours, and it's the least I can do." Charlotte should have said no. She should have maintained some professional distance, some boundary between her role as helper and any deeper involvement in this family's life. But she found herself nodding, found herself hanging her jacket on the coat rack by the door, found herself following Max into the kitchen, while Emma slept on the couch in the living room, covered with the soft blanket Charlotte had given her weeks ago. They worked together in a comfortable silence, Max boiling pasta, while Charlotte prepared a simple salad. It was domestic and ordinary, and Charlotte felt a pang in her chest. This was what she had imagined her life would be like with Marcus, if he had lived. Quiet evenings in the kitchen, preparing dinner together, the sound of children's laughter in the background. Except there was no laughter now, just the quiet breathing of a sick child fighting for her life in the next room. "She's responding well to the new protocol," Max said, breaking the silence. "Dr. Castellanos told me yesterday that her latest blood work shows significant improvement. The cancer cells are decreasing." "That's wonderful," Charlotte said, and she meant it, but she could hear the "but" that Max wasn't saying, the unspoken fear that always lurked beneath every positive update. "But we're only 2 months into treatment," Max continued, confirming her suspicion. "We have 6 more months to go, and there's no guarantee the cancer won't come back, or that it won't stop responding to the chemo. Every day I wake up terrified that this will be the day we get bad news." Charlotte set down the vegetables she had been chopping and turned to face Max, and she saw the same exhaustion in his eyes that she felt in her own bones. "You can't live like that," she said softly. "You can't spend every moment waiting for the other shoe to drop. Emma needs you to be strong, to believe that she's going to beat this." "I do believe it," Max said, but his voice cracked on the words. "I have to believe it. But I'm so tired, Charlotte. I'm so tired of being strong, of pretending that I'm okay when I'm terrified every single moment of every single day. Julia was the strong one. She would have known what to do, how to handle this. I'm just fumbling through, trying not to mess everything up." Before Charlotte could think better of it, she closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around Max in a tight hug. He stiffened for a moment, surprised, then slowly relaxed into the embrace. his arms coming up to hold her back. They stood like that in the middle of the kitchen. Two people who had lost too much holding on to each other because it was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. "You're doing an amazing job," Charlotte whispered against his shoulder. "Emma is lucky to have you as her father. You're not fumbling. You're fighting, just like she is. And you're not alone anymore. I'm here. I'm going to be here for as long as you need me." Max pulled back slightly, and Charlotte found herself looking up into his eyes, seeing something there that made her breath catch. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. His gaze dropped to her lips for just a fraction of a second before he stepped back, clearing his throat and turning away. "I should check on Emma," he said, his voice rough. "She usually wakes up around this time and she'll want something to eat." The moment passed, and Charlotte let it go, but she could feel the shift in the air between them, the acknowledgement of something unspoken. They ate dinner together, Max, Charlotte, and a groggy Emma who picked at her pasta but managed to eat a few bites, and the conversation stayed light and safe, carefully avoiding any deep topics. When Charlotte finally left that evening, driving home through streets decorated with Christmas lights, she felt both exhilarated and guilty. What was she doing? Was she developing feelings for Max? Was that even appropriate, given the circumstances? He was grieving his wife, focused entirely on saving his daughter. Charlotte had no right to think about him as anything other than someone she was helping through a crisis. But her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. The weeks leading up to Christmas were difficult. Emma's immune system was compromised by the chemotherapy, which meant she couldn't be around crowds or other children who might be carrying germs. Max had to keep her home from school. She had been attending when she could between treatments, but now even that small semblance of normalcy was taken away. Charlotte found herself spending more and more time at their house, not just driving them to appointments, but staying afterward, helping with meals, keeping Emma entertained during the long hours when she was too tired to do much but watch television. Max never asked her to stay, but he never asked her to leave either, and Charlotte couldn't bring herself to walk away from this makeshift family that had somehow become the center of her world. On Christmas Eve, Charlotte arrived at the house with bags of presents, toys for Emma, books and movies, a new stuffed animal to keep her rabbit company. She had gone overboard, she knew, but she couldn't help herself. She wanted to give Emma something to smile about, wanted to make this Christmas special despite everything the little girl was going through. Max opened the door wearing a tired smile and a ridiculous Christmas sweater featuring a reindeer with a light-up nose. "Charlotte," he said, taking in the bags she was carrying, "you didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Charlotte said firmly, stepping inside. The house was decorated modestly. A small tree in the corner, some lights strung along the windows, but it was clear that Max had made an effort to create some holiday cheer for Emma's sake. Emma was curled up on the couch watching a Christmas movie, her knit cap today featuring a Santa Claus design. When she saw Charlotte and the bags of presents, her eyes went wide. "Are those for me?" she asked, her voice weak but excited. "They are," Charlotte confirmed, setting the bags down and kneeling beside the couch. "But you have to promise to share the cookies I brought with your dad." "I promise," Emma said solemnly, then giggled, a sound that Charlotte had learned to cherish, because it came so rarely these days. They spent Christmas Eve together, the three of them, watching movies and eating too many cookies and opening presents. Emma's joy at each gift was infectious, and even Max seemed to relax, his smile reaching his eyes for the first time in weeks. When Emma finally fell asleep on the couch, exhausted by the excitement, Max carefully carried her upstairs to bed, while Charlotte cleaned up the wrapping paper and cookie crumbs. When Max came back downstairs, he found Charlotte standing in front of the Christmas tree, staring at the lights with an expression he couldn't quite read. He joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Thank you," he said softly, "for today, for everything. You've given Emma, you've given both of us, something I didn't think we'd have again. Hope, happiness, a reason to believe in good things." Charlotte turned to look at him, and in the soft glow of the Christmas lights, she saw the same longing in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. "Max," she began, but before she could finish, He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tentative kiss that tasted of Christmas cookies and unspoken promises. Charlotte froze for a moment, surprised, then kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart pounding. The kiss deepened, and Charlotte felt something inside her crack open completely, all the walls she had built around her grief crumbling in the face of this unexpected connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Max looked stricken. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have. I don't know what I was thinking. You've been so kind, and I've ruined everything, haven't I?" "No," Charlotte said, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "No, you haven't ruined anything. But Max, we need to talk about this, about what's happening between us. Because She paused, searching for the right words. "I care about you. I care about Emma. But we're in the middle of a crisis, and I don't want to complicate things or make anything harder for you." Max nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I care about you too. More than I should, probably. More than I thought I'd ever be capable of feeling again after Julia died. But you're right. Emma has to be my priority. She has to come first, always. And I can't start something with you if it's going to interfere with that. I would never ask you to put me before Emma," Charlotte said. "Never. She is my priority too. But that doesn't mean we have to ignore what's developing between us. Maybe we just take it slow, see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations, just being here for each other." Max looked at her for a long moment, and Charlotte saw the war playing out in his eyes, the desire to move forward, to accept this unexpected chance at happiness, warring with the guilt of moving on from Julia and the fear of what might happen if Emma's condition worsened. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Slow. We can do slow." Charlotte smiled and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. They stood like that for a while, holding hands in front of the Christmas tree, two broken people trying to put themselves back together with borrowed pieces from each other. The new year arrived with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Emma's blood work continued to show improvement, and Dr. Castellanos was cautiously optimistic about her progress. But the chemotherapy was taking its toll. Emma was weak and tired all the time, her appetite almost non-existent, her spirits flagging despite everyone's best efforts to keep her positive. Charlotte and Max navigated their new relationship carefully, stealing moments together when Emma was asleep or occupied, never letting their own feelings interfere with the little girl's care. They didn't tell Emma about the change in their relationship. It felt too soon, too uncertain, given everything else that was happening. In mid-January, Emma had a crisis. She developed a fever that spiked to 103 degrees, and her immune system was too weak to fight off what turned out to be a serious infection. She was hospitalized for 10 days, and Charlotte took emergency leave from work to be there, sitting vigil with Max in Emma's hospital room, watching the little girl fight yet another battle in a war that seemed endless. Those 10 days were the darkest Charlotte had experienced since Marcus's death. She watched Emma suffer, watched Max age years in a matter of hours, and she questioned everything: her ability to help, her right to be there, her decision to involve herself in this family's tragedy. What had she been thinking? That she could somehow fix this? That her presence would make everything better? On the 8th day, when Emma's fever finally broke and she opened her eyes and smiled weakly at Charlotte, calling her Angel Lady, in a voice barely above a whisper, Charlotte broke down in the hallway outside the room, sobbing with relief and terror and exhaustion. Max found her there and held her while she cried, and Charlotte realized that somewhere along the way, their roles had shifted. She was no longer just the helper, the outsider offering assistance. She had become part of this family, as invested in Emma's survival as Max was, and the thought of losing the little girl was unbearable. "I don't know if I can do this," Charlotte admitted through her tears. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," Max said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "You're the strongest person I know. You've been our rock through all of this, Charlotte. Don't give up now. We need you. I need you." Charlotte looked up at him and saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't just about Emma anymore. Somehow, without either of them really planning it, they had fallen in love. Not the passionate, all-consuming love of youth, but something deeper and more resilient. A love built on shared struggle, on mutual understanding, on the recognition of each other's pain and the determination to heal it together. "I love you," Charlotte said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "I didn't mean to, and I know this is complicated, but I do. I love both of you." Max's eyes filled with tears, and he cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too," he whispered. "I didn't think I could love anyone again after Julia, but you've shown me that the heart has more capacity than we give it credit for. You've given me hope when I had none, strength when I was weak. You've given Emma a reason to fight." They kissed there in the hospital hallway, a fierce, desperate kiss that tasted of tears and coffee, and the antiseptic smell that permeated the building. When they pulled apart, Charlotte felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness, of purpose, of finally being where she was meant to be. Emma was released from the hospital 3 days later, and the crisis passed, but it left its mark on all of them. They were more cautious now, more aware of how fragile Emma's health was, how quickly things could go wrong. But they were also more bonded, the three of them, a family forged in the fire of shared trauma. As February turned into March, Emma's treatment continued. The chemotherapy cycles became routine, 3 days a week at the hospital, with Charlotte driving them every time, staying for every infusion, holding Emma's hand when the nausea got bad, telling her stories to distract from the discomfort. The weekends were their sanctuary, the days when they could pretend to be a normal family, doing normal things. Charlotte officially told Emma about her relationship with Max in mid-March, on a Sunday afternoon when the three of them were having a picnic in the backyard. Emma had been improving steadily, her energy returning in small increments, and she seemed more like herself than she had in months. "Emma, sweetheart," Max began, glancing at Charlotte for support. "Charlotte and I want to talk to you about something important." Emma looked up from the sandwich she was nibbling, her blue eyes curious. "What is it, Daddy?" "Well," Max continued, "you know how much Charlotte has been helping us? How much time she's been spending with us?" "Uh-huh," Emma said. "She's my friend. And my angel." "She's more than that," Max said gently. "Charlotte has become very special to me, to both of us. And I wanted to ask you how you would feel if Charlotte and I started dating, if she became my girlfriend." Emma was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful in the way that children sometimes were, processing information with a seriousness that belied her age. Then she looked at Charlotte and asked, "Would you still be my friend?" "Always," Charlotte said, her voice thick with emotion. "No matter what happens between me and your daddy, I will always be your friend, Emma. That will never change." "And would you still take me to the hospital?" Emma asked. "Every single time," Charlotte promised. Emma seemed to consider this, then smiled, that beautiful, radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "Okay," she said simply. "I think that's good. I like Charlotte. And Mommy would like her too, I think." Max's eyes filled with tears at the mention of Julia, and Charlotte reached over to squeeze his hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," Max said to Emma. "That means everything to us." Emma went back to her sandwich, apparently satisfied with the conversation, and Charlotte and Max exchanged a look of relief and joy. It felt like a blessing, Emma's acceptance, not just of their relationship, but of Charlotte's permanent presence in their lives. April brought more good news. Emma's latest scans showed that the cancer was in remission. The tumors that had been visible in earlier imaging were gone, and her blood counts were approaching normal levels. Dr. Castellanos was pleased with her progress, though she cautioned that Emma would need to complete the full course of treatment and then undergo regular monitoring for years to ensure the cancer didn't return. But it was hope. Real, tangible hope. And it felt like the first true breath of air after months of drowning. Charlotte was at the hospital when they got the news, and she cried tears of joy along with Max and Emma. They celebrated that night with Emma's favorite meal, macaroni and cheese with chicken nuggets, and Charlotte brought a cake decorated with the words, Remission victory. The little girl was so excited that she could barely eat, talking nonstop about all the things she wanted to do once she was completely better, once her hair grew back, once she could return to school full-time. As May turned into June, the chemotherapy cycles finally began to wind down. Emma was down to once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and her strength returned in noticeable increments. Her hair started growing back, soft, fuzzy blonde hair that Emma insisted on showing to everyone who visited. She gained weight, her face filling out until she no longer looked like a ghost of herself. The dark circles under her eyes faded, and she began to laugh more, play more, be the 7-year-old child she should have been all along. Charlotte watched this transformation with a sense of wonder and gratitude that sometimes overwhelmed her. She had been there for the worst of it, and now she was here for the recovery, and it felt like witnessing a miracle. Emma was going to be okay. After 8 months of fighting, of suffering, of endless hospital visits and poisonous drugs and days when hope seemed impossible, Emma was going to survive. On a warm evening in mid-June, after Emma's final chemotherapy session, Max took Charlotte out to dinner at a nice restaurant in downtown Seattle. It was their first real date, their first time truly alone together in months, and Charlotte felt nervous in a way that made her feel young and hopeful. Over dinner, Max took her hand and said, "I've been thinking about something, and I want to ask you something important." Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "These past 8 months," Max said, "you've been there for us in ways I never could have imagined. You've been Emma's guardian angel, like she says. But you've been my salvation, Charlotte. You gave me strength when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel it again. You've become essential to our lives, to both of our lives, and I can't imagine facing the future without you in it." He paused, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "I know this might seem fast," Max continued, "and I know we've been through hell together, but I also know that I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want you to be Emma's mother, if you'll have us. Will you marry me, Charlotte?" Charlotte felt tears streaming down her face, and she realized she was nodding before she even found her voice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will." Max slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed across the table, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Around them, other diners applauded, and Charlotte felt a surge of joy so pure and intense that it almost hurt. This was happiness, real, earned, hard-won happiness that she thought she'd never feel again. They told Emma the next day, and the little girl was ecstatic. "Does this mean Charlotte is going to be my new mommy?" she asked, bouncing with excitement despite still being weak from yesterday's treatment. "If you want me to be," Charlotte said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "I would be honored to be your mom, Emma. I've always wanted to be a mother, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather be a mother to than you." Emma threw her arms around Charlotte's neck and whispered, "I want you to be my mommy. I think Mommy Julia would be happy about it." Charlotte held the little girl tight, and over Emma's head she met Max's eyes. They were both crying, but this time the tears were tears of joy, of relief, of a future that finally seemed bright and possible. The wedding took place in August, 2 months after Emma's final chemotherapy session, and 1 month into her maintenance therapy, a much less intensive treatment regimen that would continue for the next 2 years to prevent relapse. It was a small ceremony in Max's backyard, with just a few close friends and colleagues in attendance. Emma was the flower girl, wearing a beautiful lavender dress and a matching ribbon in her hair, which had grown out enough now to be styled in soft curls. Charlotte wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and as she walked down the makeshift aisle in the backyard where she had shared so many Sunday picnics with her new family, she felt Marcus's presence like a blessing, like he was there giving her permission to move forward, to be happy again, to love again. The vows they exchanged were simple, but heartfelt. Max promised to love Charlotte for the rest of his life, to support her dreams, and stand by her side through whatever challenges might come. Charlotte promised to love Max and Emma, to be a partner and a mother, to honor the memory of Julia while building new memories together. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Emma cheered louder than anyone, and Charlotte laughed through her tears as she kissed her new husband and then scooped up her new daughter in a tight embrace. The reception was casual and joyful, with good food and music and dancing in the backyard as the sun set over the Seattle skyline. Charlotte danced with Max, then with Emma, then found herself dancing with both of them at once, the three of them swaying together under the string lights Max had hung from the trees. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Charlotte found a quiet moment to stand alone at the edge of the yard, looking up at the stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about the day 8 months ago, when she had pulled over a speeding Mercedes on Interstate 90, about the desperate father and sick child who had changed her life in ways she never could have predicted. She thought about Marcus, about the life they had planned together, and the child they had never had. She felt a pang of sadness for what she had lost, but it was gentler now, softened by the happiness she had found. She hoped Marcus was watching, hoped he was happy for her, hoped he understood that loving Max and Emma didn't mean she had forgotten him or stopped loving him. "You okay?" Max's voice came from behind her, and Charlotte turned to find her husband, watching her with concern in his eyes. "I'm perfect," Charlotte said, and she meant it. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Max wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood like that for a while, looking up at the stars together. "Thank you," he said softly, "for stopping me that day, for not giving me that ticket, for deciding to help us instead of just doing your job. You saved Emma's life in more ways than one, you know. She needed a mother, someone to love her and support her through all of this. She needed you. I needed her too," Charlotte replied. "I needed both of you. You saved me, Max. You and Emma gave me a reason to keep living, to keep hoping, to believe that good things could still happen even after the worst things already had." They went back inside eventually, to find Emma asleep on the couch, exhausted by the excitement of the day. Max carried her up to bed, her room now, in the house that was now Charlotte's home too, and Charlotte tucked her in, kissing her forehead gently. "Good night, my sweet girl," Charlotte whispered. "I love you." "Love you too, Mommy," Emma murmured sleepily, and Charlotte's heart swelled with emotion at the word. Mommy. She was a mother now, had gained the daughter she had always wanted in the most unexpected way possible. As Charlotte and Max got ready for bed in the master bedroom they now shared, Charlotte caught sight of Julia's photograph on the dresser. Max had kept it there, and Charlotte was glad. Julia was part of their story, part of who Emma was, and her memory would always be honored in this house. "Julia would have liked you," Max said, following Charlotte's gaze. "She would have been grateful that Emma has you as a mother, that I have you as a wife." "I hope so," Charlotte said. "I hope she knows that I'll take care of them, of you both, with everything I have." "She knows," Max said with certainty. "I feel it. She's watching over all of us." That night, as Charlotte lay in bed beside her husband with their daughter sleeping safely down the hall, she felt a peace that she hadn't known was possible. The road to this moment had been long and painful, paved with grief and fear and countless trips to the hospital. But it had also been paved with love, the kind of love that grew in the darkest places, that flourished despite impossible odds, that proved that even broken hearts could be mended if you were brave enough to try. Emma's cancer remained in remission as the months passed. She returned to school full-time in September, rejoining her classmates with boundless enthusiasm. Charlotte went back to her regular patrol duties, but she had requested a transfer to the Bellevue area so she could be closer to home, closer to her family. She wore her wedding ring with pride, and when people asked about her stepdaughter, Charlotte never used that term. Emma was her daughter, in every way that mattered. The three of them settled into the rhythms of normal family life: school runs and homework help, weekend outings to parks and museums, family dinners around the table every night. Emma's hair grew back completely, long and blonde like her mother's had been, and she insisted on growing it long so she could donate it someday to an organization that made wigs for other children with cancer. Charlotte's colleagues threw her a baby shower in November, assuming she was pregnant when she requested more flexible hours. She had to awkwardly explain that no, she wasn't pregnant. She was just adjusting her schedule to accommodate Emma's follow-up appointments and school activities. But the assumption made her think. She and Max hadn't really discussed having more children, had been so focused on Emma's recovery that they hadn't talked about expanding their family. She brought it up one night after Emma had gone to bed, and Max's face lit up with surprise and hope. "You want to have a baby?" he asked. "Another child?" "I do," Charlotte admitted. "Emma will always be my first baby, my miracle child. But if you're open to it, I'd love to give her a sibling, to have a child with you." Max pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. "I would love that," he whispered against her lips. "I would love nothing more than to have a baby with you." They started trying, and in early March, almost exactly 1 year after Charlotte's proposal to help Max drive Emma to her appointments, Charlotte took a pregnancy test that came back positive. She told Max by giving him a onesie that said "Big Sister" and watching his face transform with joy. They told Emma together, and the little girl was so excited that she insisted on calling everyone she knew to share the news. Emma's doctors continued to monitor her closely, running tests every 3 months to ensure the cancer hadn't returned. Each clean scan was a cause for celebration, each good report a reminder of how far they had come. By the time Charlotte was 6 months pregnant, Emma had been in remission for over a year, and Dr. Castellanos was cautiously optimistic that the cancer was truly gone for good. The baby, a boy they named Marcus Julian Thornwood, after Charlotte's late husband and Max's late wife, was born in late November, just before Thanksgiving. Emma was immediately smitten with her baby brother, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bottle feedings. Charlotte watched her daughter, cradling the newborn with such gentleness and love, and she felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. On Thanksgiving Day, as they gathered around the table with baby Marcus sleeping in his bassinet and Emma chattering excitedly about her school play, Charlotte looked at the family she had built from the ashes of her grief and felt overwhelming gratitude. This wasn't the life she had planned. This wasn't the family she had imagined when she married Marcus all those years ago. But it was her family now, built from chance encounters and desperate moments, and the decision to show compassion when she could have just written a ticket and driven away. "What are you thankful for, Charlotte?" Max asked, noticing her reflective expression. Charlotte smiled at her husband, then at Emma, then down at the sleeping baby in the bassinet. "I'm thankful for traffic stops," she said. "For rainy days and speeding luxury cars and the courage to say yes when life offered me a second chance at happiness." "That's weird," Emma said with a giggle. "You're supposed to say you're thankful for family and stuff." "I am thankful for family," Charlotte said, reaching over to ruffle Emma's hair, which had grown long and beautiful, showing no signs of the ordeal she had been through. "You're my stuff, kiddo. You and Daddy and Marcus. You're everything." Emma smiled, satisfied with that answer, and they continued their Thanksgiving meal with laughter and love filling the house that Charlotte now called home. Outside, the Seattle rain fell softly, washing away the past and watering the seeds of a future that bloomed with promise and hope. 2 years later, when Emma reached the 5-year remission mark, the point at which she would officially be considered cured, they threw a huge celebration party. The backyard was filled with friends, family, and the entire medical team from Seattle Children's Hospital, who had fought alongside them through those dark 8 months. Dr. Castellanos gave a speech about Emma's bravery and resilience, and Charlotte found herself crying tears of joy as she watched her now 10-year-old daughter laugh and play with the other children at the party, looking healthy and vibrant and completely, wonderfully normal. That night, after all the guests had left and both children were asleep in their beds, Charlotte and Max sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, looking up at the stars. "I've been thinking," Max said quietly, "about that day on the highway, about how differently things could have gone. If you had just given me that ticket and sent us on our way. If you hadn't offered to escort us to the hospital." "But I did," Charlotte interrupted gently. "I did offer, and you accepted. And everything that's happened since then has been because we both chose to take a chance on each other. You saved our lives, Max said, turning to look at her. You saved Emma's life, certainly. But you saved mine too, Charlotte. I was drowning in grief and fear, and you threw me a lifeline. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel it again. You gave Emma a mother and me a partner, and our family a future. Charlotte set down her wineglass and took Max's hands in hers. And you saved me too, she said. You and Emma both. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You showed me that it was okay to love again, okay to move forward, okay to build something new from the wreckage of what I'd lost. We saved each other, Max. That's what love does. It saves us from ourselves. They kissed under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a family from grief and hope, and the willingness to take chances on strangers who turned out to be exactly what they needed. Emma grew up strong and healthy, with no signs that cancer had ever touched her body. She kept her promise to donate her hair when it grew long enough, and she became an advocate for childhood cancer research, speaking at fundraisers and support groups about her experience. She told people that her recovery was thanks to three things: good doctors, strong medicine, and an angel disguised as a traffic cop who had appeared at exactly the right moment to save their family. Charlotte continued her work as a police officer, eventually becoming a training instructor who specialized in teaching new recruits about the importance of compassion in law enforcement, about remembering the human element in every interaction. She told them the story of Emma and Max, about how a simple decision to show mercy instead of enforcing the letter of the law had changed multiple lives for the better. Marcus Julian grew up knowing that his big sister was special, that she had fought a battle when she was little and won. Emma never minded talking about her cancer with her little brother. She used it as teaching moments about strength and resilience and the importance of never giving up, even when things seemed impossible. On the anniversary of that first meeting on Interstate 90, Charlotte and Max made it a tradition to drive back to that same stretch of highway, to the exact spot where they had first met. They would park on the shoulder and stand together, remembering the rain and the fear and the desperate plea that had started everything. And each year, they marveled at how a single moment of compassion, a single decision to help rather than punish, had rippled out to create something beautiful and lasting. They would look at their children, Emma, now a teenager with dreams of becoming a doctor herself, and Marcus, a rambunctious kindergartner with his mother's hazel eyes, and they would feel grateful for every single day they had together, knowing how easily it all could have gone differently. Because sometimes, Charlotte thought as she stood with her husband and watched their children playing in the grassy median of that fateful highway stretch, sometimes the most important thing we can do is show up for someone else's crisis. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer is our presence, our compassion, our willingness to help carry a burden that isn't technically ours to carry. And sometimes, in the process of saving someone else, we end up saving ourselves. The years continued to pass, and the Thornwood family grew and evolved. Emma graduated high school with honors and was accepted into the pre-med program at the University of Washington, determined to become a pediatric oncologist so she could help other children fight the same battle she had won. Marcus showed early signs of following in Charlotte's footsteps, fascinated by police work and justice and the idea of helping people in need. Charlotte and Max celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a renewal of their vows, this time with both children participating in the ceremony. Emma gave a speech about how Charlotte had come into their lives like an answered prayer, how she had loved them when they needed love most, how she had shown them that families could be built in unexpected ways and were no less real or precious for being unconventional. On the evening of their anniversary, as Charlotte stood in the same backyard where they had first married, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, she thought back to that young widow sitting alone in a patrol car on Interstate 90, waiting for her shift to end, dreading the return to an empty house and an emptier life. That woman would never have believed that pulling over a speeding Mercedes would lead to this, to a loving husband, to 2 incredible children, to a home filled with laughter and light, and the kind of deep, abiding happiness that comes from having survived the worst and chosen to keep fighting for the best. Charlotte caught Max's eye across the yard, and he smiled at her with all the love and gratitude and wonder that she felt in her own heart. Emma was dancing with Marcus, teaching her little brother some complicated steps she had learned in a college dance class. They were laughing, both of them healthy and strong and alive, and Charlotte felt tears pricking her eyes at the sheer beauty of this ordinary moment. This was her life now. This was her family. Built from a single act of compassion on a rainy October afternoon, grown and nurtured through 8 months of chemotherapy and fear, sealed with vows and promises, and the daily choice to love each other through whatever came next. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had been given, and she was grateful for every moment of it. The hard moments and the joyful ones, the scary times and the celebrations, the ordinary days and the extraordinary ones. Because in the end, Charlotte had learned that love wasn't something you could plan for or control. It was something you stumbled into on rain-soaked highways, something you found in hospital waiting rooms and late-night conversations, and the sound of a child calling you Angel Lady. It was something you built brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice, until one day you looked around and realized you had created something magnificent from what had seemed like irreparable ruin. And as the sun set over Seattle that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Charlotte Brennan Thornwood stood in her backyard surrounded by her family, and felt perhaps for the first time since Marcus's death all those years ago, completely and utterly at peace. The broken places in her heart had healed, not by forgetting what she had lost, but by making room for what she had gained. She had taken a chance on a desperate stranger and his sick daughter, and they had taken a chance on her. And together, they had built something beautiful from their shared brokenness. It was, she thought, as Max slipped his hand into hers, and Emma and Marcus ran over to join them, a pretty good trade for one unpunished speeding ticket. Sometimes the best stories, the ones that mattered most, began with the simplest acts of human kindness. And this was hers, written in hospital visits and chemotherapy cycles, in tears and laughter, in fear and hope, in the daily choice to show up and love and keep fighting even when the outcome was uncertain. This was her road to redemption, paved with compassion and sealed with love, and every single mile of the journey had been worth it.